Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Decentralized Voices podcast. My name is Daria, and I'm excited to have a fantastic guest, Matt Hamilton, the head of developer relations at Asimov Protocol. In this episode, we uncover the secrets to attracting top blockchain developers, explore the key differences between Web2 and Web3 DevRel, and get an insider's perspective on life in Barbados. So enjoy our conversation and don't forget to share it with your friends. Matt, I'm happy to have you today. Please share about your journey into the blockchain field and your background.
Yeah, certainly. Great. And thanks for having me on the podcast, Daria. I know we've talked about this for a while and finally managed to make it happen. So that's really great. So I'm honored to be here and great to chat to you. Uh, yeah, my journey in blockchain is kind of, and DevRel itself is sort of very varied, and I kind of describe it as a lot of happy accidents that basically put me where I am now. So, as people might guess from the grey hairs in my beard, I've been around a little while here. And so there's a number of steps in my kind of journey. I started off originally, I did computer science in University of Bristol in the UK. Graduated from there and started a web development agency with a friend of mine. And we ran that for about 15, 16 years, building that up, mainly building portals, CRM systems, CMSs, all around Python, which this was end of the 90s, early 2000s, and nobody was really using Python in that time frame for anything related to do with web. Mainly it was a sort of bit of JavaScript, PHP. Python was really much more a sort of an academic language at that point. So we were building upon on Python. I was heavily involved with a community called Plone, which is a content management system. So I did a lot of things going along to what we would now call hackathons, what were then sort of really termed developer sprints. Helped organize conferences. I was part of the inaugural Plone Foundation, which was formed in 2004, modeled after the Apache Software Foundation. You know, kind of that sort of started me on a lot of the community side of things, kind of DevRel, really before DevRel kind of really had a name, right?
Yeah.
In that side of things. So I did that for a while. I then joined a mobile app startup, a quantified health app that allowed you to track nutrition and everything, fitness. So I was there for about 3 years. That was based out of Los Angeles. We had a remote team. And I was kind of leading the mobile development team. And then, unfortunately, they shut down, ran out of money. And I kind of, as a programming exercise, started writing a algorithmic trading bot. I wanted to learn Node.js and JavaScript. Like I said, I've mainly been developing Python. And as a programming exercise, somebody had given me previously some XRP. The XRP ledger was the first DEX in crypto, and the first way you could actually sort of trade currencies. And so without really knowing anything about trading or much about cryptocurrencies beyond sort of what I knew from sort of Bitcoin, I wrote something that started trading, and lo and behold, it was profitable. And that kind of sent me down this rabbit hole of crypto and blockchain and that side of things. This is the end of 2017, start of 2018. The crypto market all kind of crashed. And my wife said to me, well, you better go and get yourself a proper job now. Otherwise, you're just going to sit on the sofa and annoy me. I went and joined IBM, which is about as proper job as you could possibly get, right? So I was working there at IBM with a division they had called Compose, which was a database in the cloud, SaaS database in the cloud service. And I was working there with them mainly on things around compliance, GDPR compliance tooling. And then somebody I was speaking to said, hey, you'd be quite good at DevRel. And, having known what I'd done before in the sort of the Python community and web dev community, I kind of joined the DevRel team and was mainly working on AI and machine learning DevRel on IBM Cloud. And I kind of approached it from the view of as a developer, knowing nothing about AI and machine learning from a developer perspective, what do I need to know? What do other people need to know in order to use AI and machine learning in their projects, right? Because at that time, so much of AI and machine learning was very academic, right? You know, is this problem a regression problem or a classification problem? I don't know. I don't even really know what those two words mean. Regression for a software engineer means a bug. Regression for a data scientist means, fitting a line between points.
Yeah.
So they mean different things. So I kind of took that lack of understanding and kind of tried to turn it around into a positive to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And let's try and bring others along with me. So I did a lot of live streaming at the time. I was doing live streaming on Twitch once a week, kind of live coding, showing people how to build ML models using TensorFlow and Keras and that. I then got headhunted by Ripple to join as their head of developer relations, based upon what I've been doing with the XRP community and kind of my visibility and experience. Then was there for a while. During that time, I moved to Barbados, and we'll probably talk more about that that later. But that was mainly because my wife had been ill and we needed a kind of a change of location. So I left Ripple to look after my wife. Was in Barbados. Then I managed to end up, again, a happy accident, walking along the beach, bumped into a woman whilst walking my dog, got chatting to her because she had a t-shirt on with the name of an event called Acti, run by a Silicon VC investor called Bill Tai and a woman called Amanda Terry. And that was about 4 years ago. And it turned out that this woman worked for Accenture in Toronto, was working with a company called BitTensor, which is a startup doing AI, machine learning on the blockchain, and they were looking for a DevRel. So AI, machine learning,
bingo,
DevRel, kind of, and I'm stood right in the middle of that Venn diagram. And so while she's fussing my dog on the beach and we're chatting away, I ended up getting an interview with BitTensor and kind of joined them to work on DevRel stuff with
amazing.
them. I know, like I said, it's a series of kind of happy accidents, but I put myself in that location. I knew that event was happening, and so I went down to the beach thinking that there's going to be people around there. So I guess that's one of the sort of takeaways from this and my journey. I'd say to people is kind of, yes, chance and happy accidents happen, but put yourself in the way of them, right? Put yourself in the position for it to happen. So yes, then there was a bit early on in BitTensor, and they realized they were a bit too early for sort of DevRel in terms of their product. I left and joined Protocol Labs and worked on Filecoin, the Filecoin virtual machine. I believe that's probably about when I met you. I think working on Filecoin stuff, and I think probably at SheFi and that kind of stuff. ETH Global.
I know Filecoin very well because they have a lot of initiatives to store actually more IPFS things, to store some important things.
Exactly. Store a lot of humanities data is what they're working on. And then the team I was working on there kind of disbanded as things were sort of reorganizing. And I joined Arbitrum, working on Arbitrum and specifically Arbitrum Stylus, which is a Rust based smart contract system. So I was doing a lot of stuff there. So that for me was, again, something new, kind of learning Rust and learning sort of a new sort of way, what could be done with Stylus there. This was about the rise of all the AI agent side of things. And so one of the last things I did at Arbitrum was I wrote a on-chain AI agent that would actually execute within a smart contract written in Rust. It was just a simple demo that would solve a maze in an NFT. So you'd have an NFT with a maze in it, and the agent would work out how to get from the start to the finish of that maze. So that was kind of a nice kind of mix of sort of AI, Rust, blockchain stuff. And then that led me on to, I was at ETH Denver and met a number of different really interesting projects, but one of which was Asimov. And I came back from ETH Denver, so that was only 3 weeks ago, I think, and said to them, okay, let's do this, let's join. And they're like, okay, we've got some investor meetings happening in San Francisco and ETH SF happening. Do you want to come on over to that? So I jumped back on a plane, and I'm literally just back after about a week and a half of Ethereum SF, Stanford Blockchain AI Summit, Decentralized AI. There's a whole bunch of conferences and events, side events going on there. So doing all of that, and that kind of brings us up to today, really.
Thanks very much for great overview of your background. Let's talk about Barbados. What excites you the most about this Caribbean country?
Yeah. And that again was another sort of happy accident. I met up with a former colleague of mine in a pub. I said to him about my wife not being well, and we were looking to buy a caravan down in the south of France so she could get a sort of change of location. And he was like, well, just before lockdown, I went to Barbados and they've got this remote work visa called the Welcome Stamp. You should look into that. And my response was, well, I couldn't possibly move to Barbados because, and then I couldn't think of a reason why not. And so I went home that evening after a few beers, applied for the visas, told my wife, and she was like, yeah, another one of your crazy plans. And 3 days later, the visas turned up. And I said, we're moving to Barbados. She had a few choice words to say about that, but she couldn't believe that this was happening. And I was kind of like, well, what's the worst going to happen if we don't like it? We move back again. That was 4 years ago. We've kind of settled here. So a lot of Barbados, the thing I like about it is it's a lot slower pace of life. It's a small island. It's 163 square miles, 300,000 people. So, the entire country is half the size of the city I just left. And that wasn't even a big city. Right? So it's kind of like everybody knows everybody here. It's a very friendly atmosphere. Everybody says hi as you walk down the street or whatever. So I spend a lot of time down at the beach. People sort of talk about going out and touching grass. Well, I get to go and touch sand and sea. There's grass here as well, but going to go out and touch sea. So it's a nice combination, right? I get a sort of slower pace of life here, and sort of more chance to kind of focus, and then combining that with sort of the travel for DevRel and going to events and conferences, and you get the excitement and the travel kind of and the big cities and all of that kind of with that side of things as well. So it works out as a nice combo.
It's always great to get back to home and like be more chill and have this slower rhythm of life compared to the conferences and business events. Okay, so you have really great and rich experience in Web 2 and Web 3 at DevRel. So can you please share the main differences between these types of startups and like projects?
Yeah, sure. I mean, every project is different, but in terms of kind of like the main differences, I'd say between sort of Web 2 and Web 3 are to do with the fact that Web 3 by its nature is more decentralized. It's more permissionless, right? That's the whole goal of it. So people can build without your permission, without your authority. In Web 2, if you look at sort of especially like the SaaS side of things, like I worked for IBM Cloud. To access IBM Cloud, you need an API key. So you need to register for an API key. So that immediately gives like a kind of a KPI for DevRel, how many API keys were issued during that workshop that you did, how many people have signed up for the free tier, how many people have sort of promoted from the free tier to the paid tier. So with Web 2, there's a lot more that you generally have a much more specific relationship with the end developers because you kind of know who they are a lot more. With Web3, somebody can be building on your platform and you have no idea who they are until they actually announce what they're doing, right? The irony of that is that blockchains typically are public ledgers, so you can see everything that's going on, right? So on an ecosystem level, you can't hide. Right? A closed source SaaS service, you could say you have 1 million users and nobody can really dispute that. You can kind of, they have to take your word for it. Whereas on a lot of these public blockchains, you can actually look at the blockchain, you can see the activity, you can see the transactions, you can see the contracts, the wallet accounts, that sort of thing. So you can get a better feel at an ecosystem level as to what's going on, but it's often a lot harder on the individual level because, like I said, you don't know until somebody tells you. They could be building away in stealth or composing your system with some other system, like I said, without needing any permission to do so. And that's what is so great about Web3 is that there isn't that friction there. You don't have to worry about, okay, what is the licensing? At IBM, we were working with open source databases, your Postgres, your MySQL, Scala, MongoDB. And one of those, like the companies that created one of those open source databases changed its license. And so that then impacted whether or not and how developers could use it commercially for what they were doing. That kind of thing is much less prevalent in Web3. I mean, there's still some of that happens, but I think there's much less of that within Web3. So I think it's, from a DevRel point of view, a lot more of it is about community building within your community and really kind of getting those relationships, working collaboratively with other projects as well, much more so than sort of a more of a sort of walled garden approach that you get if you're working in Web 2.
I agree with you. And I want to ask you, how do you find a common language with different developers across different regions, cultures, countries?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a difficult thing, right? There's certain things that are always, I would say, always kind of common and always going to help. Kindness, openness, honesty. But those sort of values translate across regions, across geographies. If I'm there at some other place, an event, I have to be honest, I have to be humble, I have to work with whoever's there. Kind of that said, I always kind of recommend to projects to try and hire or work with or contract or build relationships with local DevRels, because the best will in the world, I don't speak Japanese, for example, right?
Yeah.
And so for me to work on a Japanese developer community is going to be very difficult because I don't understand the language personally. I don't understand the culture, the history. I don't know who their kind of like their rock stars in their community are, their idols are. If they say, oh, go and ask Bob, I don't know who Bob is, right?
Who is
Whereas
Bob?
whereas in some ecosystems, I might know exactly who Bob is, right? So that's the that's kind of thing. So I would say, definitely try and like hire or work with local people within that region, both linguistically, culturally. There's some great stuff. That's not always the case. I mean, there's some great DevRels out there going around. I mean, people like Santiago, who you probably know, who's like going all around Africa doing the Web3 Africa tour, does a brilliant job going there and doing that. And like I said, it's not to say that these things aren't possible. He is absolutely fantastic at that thing, and you can clearly see he builds fantastic relationships with people. And I think that's the thing. It's about relationships, really. And so much of DevRel can be very, very slow building. The event that I mentioned where I met the woman on the beach with the dog that got me the job 4 years ago, being organized by Bill Tai and Actai. Well, last week I was in San Francisco and they were organizing an event there, and I met up with them there and talking to them about, sort of investment stuff and Asimov, right? So, and that was 4 years later. The job that I got at IBM, I was hired by a guy I met at a Python conference 10 years prior. There's all of these kind of things. I was on an investor call just yesterday, and talking with the investors, and said, "Oh, BitTensor, yes, I know your name was familiar. I saw the talk that you did at Microsoft Reactor on decentralized AI, and again, that was 3 years ago that I did that. 4 years ago, I did that." A lot of it is very kind of slow building and sort of repetitive. You just don't know when these things are going to kind of come around again, really.
Actually, it's great advice to keep these relations and to make them like long-term and not to be transactional, but be more humble and have this long-term vision with community.
And I've got this sort of personal philosophy, sort of two things I believe in. One, there's always something you can learn, there's always something you can teach, no matter what it is. You can be there with, I remember sitting down with a guy this in the Python community, who he was a core developer of this particular project. I regarded him as this like godlike figure and he knew everything. And we were sat pair programming and I did something and he was like, "What did you just do there?" I was like, "Oh, I pressed Command Alt something. And he was like, "That's so cool. I didn't know that hotkey existed to do that," right? And so that was just some tiny little thing that I happened to know that he didn't. And he learned something, I learned a lot from him. So there's always something you can learn. There's always something you can teach. And I always believe as kind of lift while you climb. As you're kind of climbing up, bring others with you, help them. And so if there's anything I can always do with somebody, I always try and point them to somebody that can help them. If they say, "Hey, Matt, I'm interested in this. Can you help out?" If I can't help them, I'll try and connect them with somebody who can. And again, you never know when that kind of sort of, that kindness is going to pay back in the future. Overall, it builds a better community and it builds a better ecosystem, right? There's no point in like firewalling this stuff and keeping it in. Let's spread the knowledge. Let's get more and more people building, more and more people understanding what it is we're doing.
Yeah, thank you for great answer. I think it's really good advice for not only for DevRels, but for any person who wants to build career and relations in any field. Yeah, so can you please share about Asimov Protocol, what it is, and what do you do there at the head of DevRel?
Yeah, sure. So Asimov Protocol is a publicly relatively new project. We've been sort of building away for about a year and a half now, and it's derived from another project in UAE called Haltia, that was a personal AI agent, something on your phone that you could directly use, and it was very focused on sort of privacy of data. But one of the things that was learnt from the team working on Haltia was that AIs, specifically large language models, your chat GPTs, Claudes, Groks, that kind of thing, have a tendency to hallucinate if they don't know the answer, right? And they can come up with stuff that sounds reasonable, but is actually factually incorrect, right? There was a fantastic example. I think just yesterday, somebody posted on Twitter that they were, I think, an Australian national. They'd gone to Chile and they'd asked ChatGPT, "Do I need a visa to enter Chile as a Australian national?" ChatGPT said no. Google Gemini said no. The real answer is actually yes. And
Yes.
the main public website for the immigration service says, yes, you do. And they turned up on the border, and that's when they found out that the ChatGPT had been misled.
Okay.
And there's a number of examples. People have taken ChatGPT to prepare a legal defense, for example.
Yeah.
Comes up with a great legal defense, but then the citations of case law at the bottom are entirely fabricated, but they sound plausible. Hamilton versus the state 2003, section 26 or whatever. And as a non-lawyer, I look at that and I go, okay, that sounds reasonable, but they were entirely fabricated. And the judge was not happy with that, the lawyer that came up with that, right? So one of the things we're working on at Asimov. So the main thing we're working on is a decentralized, verifiable knowledge marketplace. So this is where people can submit data sets that can be independently verified to some existing or to some other standard, right? Philosophically, you can never get to ultimate truth. That's a whole philosophical question you could get down into. But within the bounds of, okay, that information is valid according to these particular primary sources, for example. So we're building this decentralized, verifiable public marketplace for knowledge. We're using technology called knowledge graphs, which are starting to come sort of back into the forefront now. We're using blockchains as well. So at the moment, we're using the Near blockchain. We're also looking to deploy to other blockchains as well, possibly Arbitrum as well, to use a blockchain as both a checkpoint for this data, so that you can actually say, okay, yes, it was validated, and here's a checkpointed point-in-time stamp that says, yes, it was validated on this time by this entity, but also as part of the incentivization mechanism. Because one of the great main use cases of cryptocurrency is aligning incentives in groups of people.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're using it for here, is to incentivize the fact checkers, the validators to verify the information that's being supplied. So decentralized knowledge marketplace, and one of the main beachhead use cases is to supply that information to LLMs for factual answering, right? So if you ask an LLM, do I need a visa to get into Chile as a Australian national? Then it should be able to look up say, okay, this is a factual question. We're going to look in the Asimov Protocol. Yes, we've got a data set that addresses that. Here's the provenance of the data set. It was fact checked at this point from the Department of Immigration of Chile. Here's the answer. So you have the provenance of where that information and knowledge actually came from.
That sounds interesting and really reasonable in the era of fake information and all these hallucinations of AI. Yeah. So what do you do at the head of DevRel? What type of developers are in your spotlight?
Yeah. So caveat that I've only been there a couple of weeks, and we've spent most of that time going around Silicon Valley, chatting to investors and attending conferences and that. But the main area I'm working on at the moment, because our product is still in development at the moment, and we have sort of internal tests and demos that we videoed, but it's not yet ready for external developers to kick the tires off. Should be hopefully within a few weeks' time, we should have a release on DevNet. But for the moment, what I'm focusing on then is looking at some of the fundamental concepts and technologies that underpin Asimov. So what are knowledge graphs and how can they be used? How do LLMs learn? What do they do in terms of hallucinations? How can you interface them? What is, looking at technologies like MPC that allow LLMs to call out to external tools to get data, that sort of thing. So what I'm going to be working on is a series of sort of educational videos, maybe some blog posts, etc., around some of those foundational technologies that we're building Asimov on top of. So the idea is to start to sort of seed this knowledge and the ecosystem and what it is that we're trying to build and the problem we're trying to solve out there, so that when we have our product out there in testnet, hopefully, like I said, in a few weeks' time, that people can actually go along there and actually have a play around with it and start using it, with a bit of background context.
Can you please share your strategies to attract and retain developers and support them on their way to learn the technology?
Yeah. That's a big question. And in general, in terms of like DevRel in general, it's very much dependent upon the technology, the maturity of the project, whether it's a startup, whether it's something that's already out there with a product, whether it's like a ecosystem sort of platform type play, or whether it's a product protocol type play. So there's sort of different approaches that can be taken with each one. Like I said, with me at the moment, with Asimov, I'm working on sort of educating developers. It'll be around some video content, some blog posts, that kind of thing. And then looking at, okay, who are the developers we want to attract here? So this has a lot of use within machine learning and data science. So I'm going to be not just working within the Web3 communities, but within the data science and machine learning communities as well. And some of those communities they're very different to the Web3 communities, and there's often can be a little bit of friction between them as to how they perceive each other. The kind of traditional sort of data science, what's called KR&R, knowledge representation and reasoning communities, they've been around sort of 20, 30, 40 years, depending upon how you count. So some of these are very kind of academic established communities in there, and a lot of them see some of the blockchain and the cryptocurrency stuff. They see a lot of the horror stories. A lot of them are a little bit wary about blockchain and cryptocurrency. So kind of my job is to sort of going to be to bridge the two of those communities together, hopefully, and try and get a bit of experience and trust between them. And I think in this case, hopefully that should be something that is hopefully not too difficult, on the basis of we're using blockchain for a very specific purpose, which is, like I said, as a checkpoint for verifying data, which is something that is I think a lot more understandable from a data science point of view, in terms of sort of verifying and checkpointing data, rather than the more like sort of DeFi sort of thing, in which there's a lot more, sort of the Web3 degen DeFi community, which I think is not as familiar or trusted by the data science community.
I was happy to study at DevRel Uni cohort last year, and it was sponsored by your previous employer, Arbitrum Foundation. So can you please share about this initiative and why did it happen, and what the main value for such companies like Arbitrum Foundation in this DevRel courses?
Yeah, so DevRel Uni, founded by Bianca Bosea, is a really great initiative in getting people kind of skilled up within DevRel. And they have some fantastic speakers, each cohort from various different backgrounds, covering everything from sort of technical presentations to storytelling to strategy to, it really is a fantastic event. Again, this is probably another one of those slightly sort of happy accident, coincident type things. So Bianca was in, where did this start? Brussels, I believe, for ECC. And I met Bianca previously at one of the other events. I can't remember which one now. We sort of chatted a little bit. Arbitrum was running an event called GovHack. Now, this wasn't actually run by the Arbitrum Foundation, just to be clear here. So most of the sponsorship didn't come from the Arbitrum Foundation, but from the Arbitrum DAO itself. So the Arbitrum DAO is a sort of a decentralized group that holds a treasury and funds various projects. And there was a group, this GovHack, that was being organized by a group called Hack for Humanity, and a guy called Klaus that set up this event. And the whole idea of GovHack was, it was a hackathon, but instead of the output being code and projects in that regard, the output is proposals to the DAO. So somebody could come along and with an idea, and they could then sort of workshop that idea during the hackathon, get feedback on it, how to present it, how to kind of convince people of its value, how to budget for it, how to structure it, and put that through. So Bianca was coming along. I said, that'd be great. Come along to this event. We can try and get some funding for DevRel Uni. I think there's a few people that had sort of said this to her from various different angles. But we met up there at the GovHack and started to work together. I was working on another proposal, which was around how to scale DevRel within the community in general. And she was working specifically on getting funding for DevRel Uni. So there was a lot of synergies between the two things. Yeah. We were doing them as one sort of single project, but then decided to split it out because the DevRel Uni was more of a specific ask, whereas what I was working on was much more of a sort of an open-ended, larger kind of project. And Bianca pitched it. She was one of the finalists or winners, I believe, in GovHack, and then got the funding through a group within the Arbitrum DAO called Questbook that got the funding for it. So it didn't sort of really kind of start from the foundation as like an official, we want to sponsor
I
Gov
got
Hack.
it. Yeah.
It was a series of kind of, again, happy coincidences. And, sort of one of my roles in DevRel is to try and sort of push these things and encourage these things to happen. So in terms of, yes, it got sponsored. And then, in terms of the benefits to the sort of Arbitrum ecosystem, well, there was a lot of people coming into DevRel that got exposed to Arbitrum as a brand, as a technology, as a community, as an ecosystem. And a lot of them were producing content as part of their coursework for DevRel Uni.
Yeah.
Okay, you need to produce a 5-minute video on, Arbitrum stylus or whatever it might be. And so that was great content for kind of us to see and for people to kind of experience and see online. So it wasn't just coming from the Arbitrum Foundation or the Arbitrum DAO, but people were seeing it from a lot of different separate voices, which is always great to see. And from my point of view, it was great feedback as well, right? Because I could look at these things and see, okay, what are people understanding about Arbitrum? What are they not understanding about Arbitrum, from a DevRel perspective, right? One of the great ways to learn about something is to hear how somebody else explains it.
Explain.
Right. And I love this. This is why I love being at booths at hackathons and stuff like that, or at a conference, right? At a conference booth, because I'll be there sort of stood next to one of the principal engineers or the CEO or the founder or whoever within the head of marketing, whoever it might be within a project. And I get to hear when somebody comes up and says, tell me about Asimov Protocol or tell me about Arbitrum or Filecoin or whatever it is, then I get to hear how they explain it. And that is often the best way for me to learn about the technology and kind of glean hints about what analogies do they use, what concepts do they explain, what areas do they focus on, what do they not do. And kind of afterwards, I can sort of ask them and say, oh, that was really good. You explained it that way. That made a lot of sense to me. I noticed you didn't mention this concept. Is there a reason why, right? And often they might come back and say, yes, because in our experience, that gets too deep into the weeds for some people or can be confused with this other concept.
Do you think Web3 is experiencing a DevRel talent gap?
I would probably say that we need more people involved in DevRel, right? But what I'm seeing at the moment is a lot of shift in what DevRel people are doing. Like, for example, like I just said, I joined Asimov, and one of the first things the founders wanted me to do is to come over and be sat there with investors to kind of be the voice of the developer at the investor table. So when the investors are asking things that I'm able to actually kind of explain them, and in some cases maybe explain them in a different way to the founders. The founders have been living and breathing this thing for a number of years and often have a very specific view of it and maybe an implicit knowledge. And so me coming in like a fresh, there's certain things I can say, okay, well, wait a minute, people don't know what that term means, or we need to explain this in a slightly different way because this person's not a data scientist, they're an investor. So
yeah.
I don't know whether it's a shortage or an overpopulation of DevRel people. I think it's just sort of changing what DevRel people are doing. And I think a lot of times they're being kind of moving up sort of strategically as projects are trying to actually differentiate themselves, get investing, that kind of thing. Right? And again, it does change. It does depend very differently upon the ecosystem. So at Arbitrum, there was a brand new project building on Arbitrum literally every day that I would find out about third hand via Twitter, right? So for me as a DevRel, there's part of me that's kind of like, what do you need me to do here? You don't need me to teach people how to build Solidity contracts because there's already a whole bunch of other stuff out there. So my role was a bit more about the relationship side than the education side there, right? It was meeting people and basically saying, hey, look, you want to build on our ecosystem because everybody else is here, and kind of matching people up with funding and that side of things. So that was kind of my role there. Whereas, like I said, my role in Asimov is a bit more strategic in looking at, we're building something from scratch here. What do developers need? Let's make sure we're building what developers need, what the market needs as well. So I'm working kind of between the marketing people, the biz dev people, the founders, the developers, the product team, really in the middle there. I sometimes like uncharitably say that DevRel is kind of like the messy stuff left over after, events has done its bit, marketing's done its bit, product has done it. Kind of what's left after all of those sort of teams is DevRel, right? And depending upon the team, if it's a very established team, they may have all of those additional teams doing stuff, and DevRel kind of ends up as the glue between them. If it's a sort of a smaller team and those dedicated teams don't yet exist, then DevRel ends up doing a lot of those tasks, right? So in DevRel, you're booking a venue, you're organizing the catering for an event, you're writing the documentation. So you might be involved in a lot wider things if it's an earlier project.
Early startup,
So I think
yeah.
it changes a lot. So overall, I would say there's a lot of room for DevRel people. There's a lot of different roles within DevRel, and keep an eye out, because it might be that you might find yourself more suited to an established team in which you are one of a team of DevRels. At IBM, I was part of the London DevRel team with about sort of 7 or 8 people. And we were like one geographic team based in London. There was also the Bangalore team, the Tokyo team, the San Francisco team, etc. So we were, we had a lot of additional colleagues within the DevRel team that we were working with. Whereas other projects I've been in, it's like kind of like, okay, I'm the only DevRel. I've got to do everything from making the strategy to ordering the drinks, right? And everything in between. So like I said, just if you're coming into DevRel, look around, because you might find yourself better suited to a more established team. You might find yourself better suited to a startup team. You might find doing everything a benefit or something you want to do. You might find you want to just focus on one particular area within DevRel. But also, I would say as well, one of the biggest things with DevRel is the people skills, the relationship building, the communication. Yeah. I think a lot of those are in many ways more important than the raw technical skills. It's probably easier to teach somebody how to write a Solidity smart contract than it is to teach them to have empathy with a developer.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And some of those people have a lot of empathy with developers because they don't, they're coming into that ecosystem new, right? Recall back when I said I started at IBM doing DevRel with AI, I didn't understand AI. So I had an empathy for developers that were building stuff with machine learning. And I could use what I was learning as kind of a basis for that to help other people, right? So definitely that's what I would say. If you're coming into DevRel, some roles you do want specific technical people. Like if you're working on client libraries, more on the developer experience side, and maybe you're working on, say, client libraries, you're writing code that developers are directly using, then you might want some more technical knowledge there. But a lot of DevRel, I would say the biggest skills are the communications, the empathy, the relationship building, the showing up there and just being there, with developers, right? Being there sort of time and time again, so people, recognize you. They come to you. Okay, I know I can go to Matt and ask for help on this, right, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, thanks for a great answer. And actually, you answered on my last question, because I wanted to ask you about your advice to aspiring DevRels and about mindset of DevRel. But actually, you have answered to all these questions. So, Matt, thank you very much for sharing your expertise, experience, and your ideas. It was a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you very much. And if you want to add something like final words, please do.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Daria, for inviting me on. This has been really good to chat to you about this. I love talking to people about DevRel. As you can tell, it's something I'm very, passionate in, and, helping people learn, whether that's the technology or whether that's, sort of DevRel itself, kind of like meta, sort of a meta, step back, then, I'm more than happy to do that, and more than happy to chat to people. In terms of sort of any last words, if you're interested in DevRel, dive in. Places like DevRel Uni are great events and great cohorts. DevRel Uni, places like Shifai as well. There's a bunch of like online resources. There's a lot of really good stuff for people getting into DevRel, and a lot of communities there as well for people. And in terms of Asimov, keep an eye out. Like I said, hopefully in a few weeks' time, we'll have some stuff out on DevNet that developers can play around with. In the meantime, look out for me. I'll be, like I said, doing some videos and maybe some blog posts about some of the foundational technologies and concepts that we use.
Yeah, thank you very much. I leave all your links under this video so people can check out and follow you and ask you questions. So guys, thank you for your attention, and see you in the next videos. Bye.